Being out on the water can always be an interesting time. You never know when things are going to get a little out of hand out there, and you're going to find yourself scrambling to try and get control back, just like some of the things we'll see in this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. And our first story to make the boating news this week is actually going to feature just such an incident, and is going to take us over to Florida, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago when the Utopia 4 was passing by the Virgin Voyages cruise terminal when all of a sudden several tugboats and the Virgin Voyages crews fired up their engines in an attempt to move the cruise ship, and the backwash wound up pushing the Utopia 4 into a bridge and several channel markers. Fortunately, in this situation, no injuries were reported, and damage to the Utopia 4 seems to be minimal as it did continue under its own power. But this is not the Utopia 4's first encounter with a commercial vessel. Some of you may remember this. About 2 years ago, there was a cargo vessel off the coast of the Bahamas called the Tropical Breeze that wound up sinking after it got into a collision with a yacht. It just so happens, this happens to be the exact same yacht that collided with that vessel. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Indonesia, where this was the scene actually just a few days ago. Now, as we get into this one, I want you to watch this ferry vessel we see right here. It's trying to wedge its way in between two coal barges, but unfortunately for the ferry, the two tugboat captains that are controlling the barges did not see the ferry try and cut in between the two. And as you can see right here, these barges are starting to converge on each other. Now, I'm going to open off with this, guys. Everybody winds up okay in this situation, but it is a wild one. As you're about to see, the actual ferry boat is going to get spit back out in between the barges as they started to converge closer to the other end of the boat, but it winds up getting lodged right here, and the next thing you know, this ferry winds up getting crushed by the two barges. Now, fortunately in this situation, all the passengers on board this ferry were quickly able to either jump onto one of the barges and rescue themselves or swim themselves to safety after this, and as I mentioned, nobody was injured, but still a really wild scene to see over here in Indonesia. The tugboat captain was interviewed after the incident, and he claimed he did not know the ferry vessel was there, but also mentioned that the ferry vessel never initiated any type of communication before attempting that maneuver. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to the coast of the Dominican Republic, where this was the scene just a few days back, when the Coast Guard wound up rescuing 6 people approximately 30 miles north of Puerto Plata. The Coast Guard received a distress call from a Carnival cruise ship claiming it had picked up 6 passengers from a life raft in the water who claimed that their cargo vessel had sank with 12 people on board. The other 6 were still missing. The Coast Guard quickly jumped into action, launching one of their rescue helicopters to the scene to begin the search for the 6 missing passengers and what they would describe later as pretty poor weather. Fortunately, the Coast Guard was able to find all 6 of them floating amongst debris from the sunken vessel. The Coast Guard used the vessel's emergency radio beacon's last transmission to determine the location of the sunken boat, and of course when they got into the area they were able to find the 6 crewmen in the water. Eventually all the crew were transferred over to Puerto Plata for emergency medical services, but all 12 were actually cleared in the end and found to be in good health. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to bring us back stateside and take us over to Miami, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago when the crew of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norvell returned to the Miami Coast Guard station carrying over 950 pounds of confiscated narcotics valued on the street at over $12 million. As well as bringing the narcotics back, they actually brought back 6 suspected smugglers who were apprehended during their interdictions in the Caribbean Sea. This is all part of an ongoing effort with the Coast Guard and several other marine agencies and countries as they try and crack down on the import of narcotics to the US. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. Just like Beardall89, Chad Fisher, and Adam Coolidge did this week. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button here.